Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Woohoo! All right, let's try that again. It's Vegas. Good afternoon. Woo! All right. Well, welcome. My name is John Weston. I work for Microsoft. I am a senior IT pro evangelist based out of Dallas, Texas. So I'm part of our field team that does promotion around our private cloud offerings. You can contact me at john.weston@microsoft.com. My business cards are up here on the table or around the stage. If you want to pick up one of those afterwards, you're welcome to do that. I'm known as TechNet Guy on Twitter, so I'm pretty active on Twitter. So connect with me on Twitter. Follow me there. You can also get a hold of my blogs out there at blog.technet.com/jweston. I will have this PowerPoint up there probably, if not this afternoon, tomorrow at the latest. I'll have this PowerPoint available from my blog. So welcome this afternoon. This is Deep Dive about Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1, as I call it, our easiest product name in the world. Okay, I mean, marketing couldn't come up with something better. Yes, Service Pack 1 is not just a bug fix. It is a whole bunch of new features. And I know it's been out for a while, but I think it's appropriate to go over it this time to kind of explain and deep dive and give you some good demos, two of these particular features. Okay, and so we're going to go pretty deep here into both dynamic memory and the RemoteFX capabilities of changes that happened with Service Pack 1. There we go. All right, so here are the two features we're going to take a look at. Dynamic memory is something that's relatively new for Hyper-V. It's been kind of a pain point for some people in the density that they can do things with in a virtualized environment, particularly with VDI. Okay, but allowing us to give a range of memory, a starting memory, oversubscribed memory, all those kind of things. We'll go into it in great detail. Dynamically adjusting, changing our consistent performance in the way that our virtual machines work with a memory allocation in a Hyper-V environment. And the other half of this session, the second half of this session, I'm going to talk about RemoteFX. And this is, again, a new feature in Service Pack 1, which allows us to be able to put a very, very nice graphics card into our server, which is kind of an oxymoron, right? I mean, why should you have a very nice graphics card in a server? But I'll explain. And demo that you can have very nice graphics capabilities in your VDI sessions using RemoteFX, and we'll talk about exactly what cards work. We'll talk about, how do you configure this? We'll talk about, the considerations, and then, of course, I'll do a demonstration showing you off how I've set that up in my demo environment. So again, these are some of the new capabilities here, just a little bit of wording of those. We have higher density virtual machines that we can do now with our dynamic memory, and a rich user experience with our full 3D graphics capabilities with our RemoteFX and Windows 7. So what does higher density really mean? This means more virtual machines on the same physical server. So say, for example, this laptop I've got up here is a Lenovo W510 with 16 gig of RAM in it. If I have 4 servers running on it, each with 4 gig of RAM, that's it in the old world. Now, with dynamic memory, I could probably get a 5th or a 6th machine on there, not give them all 4, start them at some lower level, and allow them to grow to a certain point. And I can even allow them to grow bigger than the 16 gig that's on this machine, but that's not recommended, and we'll talk about that. Okay, why you would want to do certain things. And so it talks about the licensing and the VDI and some of the comparisons here. Again, the references are here on the bottom. I won't necessarily spend time going through in great detail here, but higher density, in most cases, lower capital expenditure cost here by allowing us to have more workstations per physical server in a VDI particular environment. So again, going into the dynamic memory in a little bit more in detail here, there are quite a number of slides here in the detail that I've pulled together from lots of different resources that allows us to be able to dynamically change memory between active virtual machines. The memory inside of them allows us to exceed what the physical memory is in the machine. And again, it's not recommended that you do that, but allows you to be able to do that of a page file if that's appropriate. How do we manage these? There's lots of different tools that we have at our disposal. The one I'm just going to use is going to be Hyper-V Manager, but you can also use virtual machine management. You can use scripting. You can use PowerShell to be able to allow us to manage this memory capabilities, and we'll go through and show you some of those. So here we have a range of memory, both a min and max, to individual virtual machines, and it just works. Okay? It dynamically adjusts based upon the demand, and the demonstration that I'll do here in a few minutes allows us to go through and dynamically adjust the memory that's necessary for the individual virtual machines. Now we can change that on the fly, or we can change it as depending upon how we set things up at the beginning. And again, we can go through and script that throughout the different parts. Again, some of the benefits here: higher density, better use of the memory that we've got, enables that accurate guess memory sizing. And we've got some sizing tools that I'll point you to here at the end of the session. So, what are the requirements to do dynamic memory with Hyper-V? You must have server or Hyper-V server, and I'm very clear you'll understand the difference between those, right? Hyper-V server is just our free download, where Windows Server is our server product that has Hyper-V built into it. You do have to have the latest version of it, which is 2008, R2, SP1. Okay, so we had 2008, obviously in the year 2008, we had a major release in 2010 of the R2 product, and then almost a year ago now, we came out with the Service Pack, and the Service Pack is where this new dynamic feature has been included. So that's what I've got to have from the server side. That's what I'm running on this laptop that I'll demonstrate from here in just a minute. So what virtual machines do we support? Well, notice, now as a virtual machine, we support 2000, but why don't you see Windows 2000 up there? Because the dynamic memory, okay? So it doesn't support dynamic memory. So what's the oldest software we support here? Windows Server 2003, SP2. You can see both the 32 and 64-bit environments. Okay, so just about anything since then: Windows 7, Windows Server, Windows 7 SP1, and products since then. Yes, I have tested this with both Win Server 8 and Win 8, and they do work very well in the dynamic memory environment, but I'm not going to show you those today. So here's some of the settings that we've got. First is our startup memory. Where do we want to start this machine out? At what point, how much memory do I give it? What is the starting point of that memory? Okay, max RAM. And first I thought, why do we need one? Let's let it grow as big as it needs to, right? Well, that's not a good idea. Okay, let's think about, take this laptop, for example, has 2 hard drives in it. Okay, I've got an SSD drive, then I've got a traditional drive in that machine. Now, if I use one drive for my VHD files and the other drive for my memory page file or swap file that's from my host OS operating system, when it goes out, it runs out of memory, physical memory, if I oversubscribe it, it's going to have to go to a swap file. And then all of a sudden we're going to be in contention with the hard drive to be able to page things back in and forth, and we're going to see performance degradation. Okay, now if I have more spindles, it's less of an issue. Okay, now obviously you shouldn't be running too many big servers on a laptop to begin with, okay, but you got to be careful about oversubscribing, because you're again going to be using physical disk for memory instead of the actual memory that you've got on your system. So the memory buffer is a control that we've got that allows us to keep extra memory. So if I just assign the bare minimums of the exact amount of memory that a server is using, and then dynamically upped it, and then it comes right back down as it stops moving that memory, we're going to have what's called paging, or the process of it's always continually grabbing more memory for that individual virtual machine. Okay, and that's, again, another performance hit, so we don't want to do that. A memory buffer allows us to associate a percentage of the base memory, and 20% is the default, and again, in the demo, I'll show you how to set all this up. But it allows us to be able to set a base amount of memory plus X. And X is that percentage over the top of that allows us to be able to keep that much memory associated with that. But again, if we need it by other machines, it is capable of doing that. So it's not necessarily a minimum, it's a buffer on top of that minimum that we've got. And then the memory weight, otherwise known as the priority. So let's say, for example, I'm running half a dozen servers or guests from one host, and then I want to be able to give, as they all need more memory, who gets the memory first? What server or service is most important to get more memory if it has such a need? Okay, so under pressure, when it needs it, helps us prioritization. So it's a combination of the memory buffer and the memory weight, which allows us to be able to tune this on an ongoing basis. So if I have lots of virtual machines running, let's say in a cluster environment, it allows me to be able to control that and allowed it to be able to tune this performance in the way, and again, I'll show you where those settings are when we get to the demonstration section. Memory demand is how much is currently being used. Even though we start something out, let's say at 512 meg, we'll show you what it's actually being used by that memory, and as I go through the demonstration, we'll see that increase as we put more demands on that server. Assigned memory is current memory, and then memory status. Notice the status can be OK, low, or warning. If you set a server to a set amount of memory and it goes over that or can't use it, you're going to start popping up getting these warnings that I have low memory or I'm warning when committed memory exceeds the assigned memory. Okay, so I don't have any more room for that server and we're going to get performance issues. So this is when you want to increase that upper limit that you've got. But again, before you go to oversubscribe, dynamic memory is good. Oversubscribe can be a huge performance issue, and so you need to be very careful on your upper end assigning areas that you've got or how much memory you're allocating to all the different environment. Another management tool that we've got to be able to manage this is our System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Okay, so I did a couple of screenshots here to show you what it looks like in Virtual Machine Manager with our hardware profiles. Okay, so if you create a profile of the way that you want to build new machines with virtual memory, here are the settings. And so notice I have the traditional static the way we used to be before SP1, but now with our dynamic memory settings, I've got startup, maximum, and our memory buffer. Notice priority is not an option that we can set with VMM. Okay? Except for the right-hand side, if we go to the priority of high, normal, low, or a custom setting. Okay? That's a little bit different than what we get with Hyper-V Manager. And again, I'll show you that here in a couple of minutes. And there goes my clicker. All right, if I get too far away. So dynamic memory settings. Again, notice here, as I'm looking at my servers that are running in my Virtual Machine Manager environment, I've got CPU utilization, but then I've also have now a memory demand setting, as well as the assigned memory, and then the status of it, whether it's OK, low, or it's critical, it's out of memory, and I may need to do some other settings. Again, I can refresh the commandlet. This is, by default, only pulled once every 30 minutes. So some of the placement, you must have Service Pack 1, and it's kind of interesting on how this works. If you have a virtual machine that is created in 2008 R2 but not in SP1, it will not have any of the settings. As soon as you open it either in Hyper-V Manager or in Virtual Machine Manager, it'll have it as static memory. And then you can go in and edit the properties of that. Okay, but the server, the host server that virtual machine is running on must be at SP1 before those options become available. If it's in a stopped or starting or saved state, again, you may have those settings. And obviously, it can't be running before you can change some of the settings and the memory settings, or they'll be grayed out. We do have some new changes to the way PowerShell works. We have some new commandlets for this dynamic memory. As you can see, we've got dynamic memory enabled, max memory in megabytes, and a buffer percentage are settings that we can call or do a parameter passing through our PowerShell. Okay, so notice the memory assigned shows us so what is the current memory that's used. So I could run a script to go out there and poll all of my virtual machines and see how much memory that they're currently using. And we use, obviously, of course, the existing memory MB, which shows us what is the current memory of that machine. That hasn't changed. In Operations Manager, or the Operations Management Packs, they have been updated to reflect these in our Pro Packs. As you can see, there's the URL for you that allows you to manually import these updated packs to support the dynamic memory. So go out to technet.microsoft.com. In the library, you see the code there that will allow you to be able to download that supports the dynamic memory, and you can put that operational management or the management pack into your system. All right, so it's demo time. Let me switch over to that other laptop. All right, so this machine, again, as I said, is a Lenovo W510 with 16 gigabyte of RAM. I do have a quad-core processor in it, and I am running Windows Server 2008, R2, and SP1, okay? And so I've got Hyper-V role installed, and so I've got my Hyper-V Manager up here, and as you can see, I've got lots of different virtual machines that I can configure. Let's go out first and build a new machine. Okay, so if I go out here and click on New Virtual Machine and walk through the wizard here, I want to show you some of the things that have changed. We'll call this one Sample Vegas is the name of the machine. So notice right here off the settings, this paragraph has changed. Notice that I can go anywhere from 8 meg up to 65536 megabytes of memory per virtual machine. Now, as I told you, I only have 16 gig of RAM in this machine, but it's allowing me to allocate 64 gig of RAM to each virtual machine. So that's my oversubscribing. Again, obviously for performance, you may not want to do that if they're all going to be using more than you've got in physical memory in this machine because you're going to go to page swapping. Okay, so I'm going to start this one out at 512. I'm not going to add it to the network, and I'm going to go out there and just create a very small 10 gigabyte VHD file, and I'll install an operating system later. Okay, so let me go ahead and finish that. And I've built a new virtual, basically just a container, if you will, of a new virtual machine. I haven't installed any operating system. I haven't connected it to any networks. But let me show you some of the settings that have changed. If I right mouse click here and go to settings, go down to the memory settings here. This is, again, all new in SP1. Okay? In the past, it was, here's how much memory that machine has, and that's it. Okay? It started up with that much memory, it ran with that memory, it allocated that much memory, and it couldn't go over that much memory. Okay? So now, with SP1, we've got, notice, static. That is just like it was before SP1. But then now I have the dynamic capability, so I switch down to my dynamic settings, and I can start it at anywhere that I want. If I want to start it at 1 gig, if I want to allow it to go up to 8 gig, I can do that. Okay? Notice we also have from this screen the 2 different settings that allow us to control the performance. The default memory buffer is 20%. And that is, it starts out at 1 meg, and as I increase, it's going to increase it in 20% increment, and it's going to leave it at that 20% increment. It's not going to shrink it back down. It's going to leave a 20% buffer. The larger you make this buffer percentage, the more memory that's going to take up. Okay? The smaller you make it, obviously the more memory you can allocate to different machines, but again, that is a prioritization. You don't want it continually paging back and forth as the dynamic memory needs. So my recommendations are leaving this at least at 10%. There is a particular reason why we set it to 20% as the default. Again, you control the settings that you want there. The other setting that we've got down here is also our memory weighting. Okay, that is our percentage that allows us to be able to control prioritization for virtual machines. So if I have multiple virtual machines on here all vying for more dynamic memory, this allows me to be able to dial it up or control it up or down. So I'll go ahead and make that change to that virtual machine, and that's just an empty one that we brought up. Now let me go over to one of these that currently I have running. So here's a session that I built. I've got, as you see, several different demo machines running. MMS happens to be, and let me just go to it. This is a Windows Server 2008 guest that I've got running. Yes, I do have this running in a very little amount of memory. Notice it is assigned 512 meg of memory. Do not run server in 512 meg of memory. Okay, but also one of the things I wanted to show you by this demo is the memory demand that's currently on this machine is 332 meg. The memory status is okay, and it's been up for about an hour since I rebooted this server. Okay, so that's the settings, or the default settings. And let me show you what this one is configured to. 512, notice it's not static. Because it is up and running, notice these are grayed out. So I cannot make changes when the machine is running to these settings. So I would either have to suspend it or turn off the virtual machine, allowing me to open up and make changes to these settings. That's why I can't modify it. So before, during lunch, I set this up to 512 to start out, allowing it going up to 4 gig of RAM based upon the needs. I left the 20 and the middle between low and high settings on the prioritization of how this particular virtual machine is going to get dynamic memory. Okay, so let me go and show you how this one's worked. Notice right now it's at 332 meg, and it starts at 512. And again, we have a buffer of 20%. So let's switch over to now that virtual machine, and we're just going to do some memory pounding on it. I'm just going to begin to start opening up an Internet Explorer. We'll do some memory diagnostics. Okay, I don't want to start that one because it's going to say, what are you doing? And then I'm going to do Control Panel. Let's do some administrative tools. We'll do Storage Explorer. What should we do? Performance Monitor. What else do we want to do here? We'll open up our administrative tools. And as you can see, I go through open the help. If I switch back over here, notice what's happening. Watch the memory demand, right? We were at 332, okay? And so that's climbed up to 440 based upon just those first few windows that I've opened. Let's open up a few more. You know, I can open up some games. I can open up video and music on it. Let's go and look at the network settings. We'll open up some more. Why don't we open up a backup and some PowerShell modules. We'll load in some of the different services components. As you can see, I'm just throwing some different things that might have memory requirements on it. And I'll do a security configuration. So now, as we switch back to it, notice what's happened. The demand went up to 566, and notice it's still climbing, right? Now it came back down. It went up briefly to 590. But what is the memory assigned? 674. Why is that not exactly what the memory demand number is? I always get asked that question. The 20%. Great. Okay, so the 20%, remember that we had in the settings, so whatever the highest it got to, it's going to add 20% of that and allocate that to that assigned memory location. Again, that is a setting that you can control how it increases how much memory. So I started at 512 and I wanted to jump up at 20% increments, allowing me to allocate that. So now even if I go and start closing a lot of those windows and get the memory back down below 512, it will still stay at 644 until I get it all the way down to under 300, okay, and then it'll finally bring it back down. So it's going to bring it, save 20% so it doesn't continually go up and down, paging back and forth depending upon the needs. If you have any questions I forgot to ask at the beginning of it, we do have 4 microphones. I might be able to hear you, but they are recording this session, so if you wouldn't mind, come up to the microphones and make sure I see if you've got any questions as we go throughout the session. Any questions on this demo? All right, we got one going here. We'll give him a second to get to the mic.
You talked about the memory allocations jumping up 20% above your maximum. At what point does Hyper-V decide that a memory allocation is required? Is it when your memory utilization is above 80% of your current allocation? And when you make those allocations, do you have any type of tangible performance hit in the VM that's running?
Great questions. So 2-part questions here. The first part is at what point does it know it needs to add memory? And the second is what is any performance degradation in the VM? So as you saw that we were going there, when I started out, we had, 332. When it got up to in the 400s, so 447, it didn't trigger that. It waits until it's almost at 100% utilization. I don't know if there's an exact trigger before the 100%, but in all the practice that I've looked at it, once it gets to the 512, it's then going to grab that extra 20%. And so it waits until it's used 100% of it, and then it's going to bump it up in the 20% increments. There is some performance hit because you have to think about the allocation of the memory that's going, particularly based upon how many spindles that you've got. I've got physical memory in this machine, but I also have a page file, correct? We're using physical memory, and so it's reallocating to that VHD file or to the virtual machine how much memory it has to running. So you don't want it constantly changing the amount of memory. That's why you want to use that buffer. So it goes out there and grabs a bigger component or bigger piece of it so it's not having that hit against your performance.
Thank you.
Okay. Got time for 1 or 2 more, then we'll keep moving on.
You mentioned briefly, but what are exactly the metrics as far as when Hyper-V shrinks that memory back down? Like how does that function?
Okay, so your question is when does it decide to shrink it back down? So it's based upon the buffer. Okay, so let me again show you the settings on this particular machine. I've got the settings set at 20%, right? This setting right here. So if we change that down to a 0, which it's not going to let me, right? So it's got to be between 5 and 20%. Let's see if we can do a 5%. It probably won't let me make any changes to that. Let's see if it will dynamically or not. I haven't tried that before. Yep, it did. Okay, so now notice I'm only using a 5%. So if I start closing some of those windows that we had here, it should start bringing that back down. See if we close enough of them, free up some memory. Let's go back and see if we made any changes. Yeah, see, this has only gotten down to 498, so it's got to be far enough below the 512 before it makes the decision to do that. So it has to have enough in that buffer. I'm not sure. I was probably going to still keep it at the 20%, even though I made that change. I'd probably have to reset the machine to change it from 20% to 5. Another question?
I'm just curious if there are any workloads that dynamic memory is not a good idea?
Are there any workloads that are not a good idea for dynamic memory? I'm not familiar with any that, the workloads that currently support under virtualization should be just fine for dynamic memory. Now, there's some certain considerations you need to think of, like SQL Server and Exchange, of starting them out at the appropriate level. Don't start an Exchange server with 512 meg, right? Obviously, you want to kick them off at the appropriate level at the appropriate time. One last one here, and then we'll do some more. I'll save time at the end for other questions.
I noticed the settings were grayed out for altering those settings when the
machine's running. Correct.
Now, when using like data center guest VMs, are there any options to make those changes while the system is up?
No. While the system's up, notice those are grayed out. I would have to bring the virtual machine down to make those changes.
Okay.
All right, great questions. Let's switch back over to this machine. All right, the other half of this section that I wanted to talk about is RemoteFX. If you're not familiar with it, VDI is the capability of running lots of workstations or virtual desktop interface, allowing us to be able to run many different machines from one server. There's a lot of pros and cons to doing this. It's not for everyone, but if you have a highly consistent environment that you want to contain a lot of control on, it may be appropriate for you. So here's a little bit about that environment. We've had traditionally some issues with being able to support good graphics capabilities, because if you're running this from a server, the graphics rendering is done at the server side. Okay? And if you look at most servers today, the graphics cards in them are very poor because most people do not have very high-end graphics. They're not doing 3D videos, CAD/CAM type of applications from the server, and so by design, the server guys that build servers don't put a lot of nice graphics cards into servers. So my coworkers and I were building a test environment, and we wanted to build out, it's called itprosrocks.com. I'll connect to it here in just a minute, to go out there and learn from this. Harold and I will be doing a session tomorrow about how we built out our own private cloud in that environment. But we wanted to test this RemoteFX feature, and so we put a nice video card, and we'll talk about the specifics of the card. So we start off here talking about the architecture of how this all works. So again, this is a new feature in SP1 that allows us to be able to take a very nice video card and do more of the rendering on the server side. Okay? And so they'll go through several different slides here talking about the individual components of what works where. So we do have the processor, the graphics CPU, outputs the renderings to the physical via DirectX capabilities, and then the screen details are captured from that CPU from the parent partition, allowing us, so there's communications between the remote desktop protocol and the graphics card generator. As you can see, authentication, encryption, client device, redirection are all done that through the Windows 7. We do have to have Windows 7 as the client to be able to do this. And again, I will connect here in just a second, showing you off some of the capabilities here. Optionally, we can offload some of the codecs from the CPU, GPU capabilities to the driver, increasing the scale and fidelity if we have a lot of applications that want to do that. So for example, if you're trying to do VDI in an architectural firm that does a lot of 3D rendering and graphics calculations, you can really fine-tune this with RemoteFX. Lots of architectural understanding here in these first few slides in this section. But again, the Hyper-V parent partition, what's running at the server component, what's running in the Windows 7 child partition that's running in the VDI world. So notice here we've got a VM bus that has a shared memory components that allows the communications to happen between what actually is happening at the virtual GPU driver in the Windows 7 virtualized environment versus where is the parent partition of things that are executing. And again, another way of understanding all that same information, typically people are going to be using RDP to be able to connect to that. So we have a user mode RDP that allows us to be able to provide all that information and display that to the remote client. So that's how our encoding pipeline works with it. So again, why would we want to use this? Lots of great examples. Most of the situations that people are using RemoteFX are VDI solutions. You can have 3D graphics card, rich media capabilities, virtual GPUs that you can install in this configuration, improving performance or RDP. You know, some of the lag time that we get is really in the efficiency that these desktops. This allows us to have more dense number of users in a particular server that we're hosting in a VDI environment. A lot of client choices that we can do that work from this environment. So it's a game changer in the VDI world. We have host-side rendering of both Silverlight and some of the other formats, media content. Full rich Windows experience with the Aero Glass capabilities, greater video performance. Intelligent screen capture and hardware-based encoding. So again, a much richer experience from the user perspective, again with the graphics capabilities running from the server side. And then bitmap, remote hardware, and hardware-based decoding. Again, there's all kinds of different devices, tablets, devices, human input devices of different sorts that allow us to be able to have a fuller, richer set of clients running in a VDI environment. So here's the scenarios end to end. Where we're going to have lots of different clients that are out there. Again, lots of different hardware, software combinations from the end user's perspective. From the server perspective, I'm going to use a hardware encoder, depending upon what type of applications I want to use, as well as graphical GPUs, and put those in some very, very nice graphics cards that I incorporate as part of my server solution. Resources are shared, both administrative control, centrally managed, and adaptively utilized. And so this allows us to be able to continue to have very tight control around our applications, control around our servers. You know, to me, the biggest selling pitch of VDI is Patch Tuesday, right? Instead of you worrying about and rolling out all these patches to your workstation, where do you fix it in a VDI solution? That server. And so it doesn't matter whether you've got 12, like we have in our lab environment, or 200. Clients running off of a cluster of servers. You have a centralized place to manage your applications, manage your patches, manage your backups from a central perspective. Again, VDI is not the solution for everyone. You do have to have the appropriate bandwidth for the RDP sessions. I've got a client that's outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they do not have high-speed connectivity. Okay, and this may not be an appropriate solution for them because of the requirements to be able to do this high-end graphics over the connection. So here's the payload that's actually sent between the RemoteFX client and the server infrastructure. Again, showing you all the different layers that happen between the bulk compression with the different RDP layers. We send keyboard and mouse strokes from the client back to the server, and we're sending obviously the graphics channel back out to the client that are rendered from the server side. We do also support partner virtual plugins. Okay, so if again a third-party utility wants to write to these APIs, they can connect and enable on top of this RDS infrastructure. We also support with this USB redirection. Okay, I'm not going to totally say that, yes, we support USBs totally in the VDI environment, but this does do USB redirection. Okay, so this is designed to use in your RDVH environment. Allows you to have USB devices in your thin client. So the scenario is I've got a desktop or a laptop out in the field, and I need some USB device to work with my application, whether it be a thumb drive or something like that. So we do now support that with this generic RemoteFX capabilities, allowing us to be able to support more devices out at the thin client. Only one session can have connection to that USB device. So if I'm running multiple RDP sessions, more than one cannot have connection to that physical USB device on the thin client at a time. Okay, so it's a single-use USB redirection capability from the endpoint. So this, kind of a summary here of RemoteFX in Hyper-V. Again, this is new in SP1. We haven't had these capabilities before SP1. The virtualized graphics and resources, advanced codecs that we're going to use, and high fidelity and 3D content, Windows Aero Glass. local-like remote experience. And it's kind of an interesting terminology there, local-like but remote. Because users have a certain expectation that they're used to with their Windows 7 desktop, with the graphics capabilities, the rendering, the speed of the graphics. And if you've put VDI out there, most of the limitations have been on the hardware capability that we've got at the memory card and the server that's holding us back. Okay? So it's trying to make sure that we understand that, and now with this new graphics cards, having more of a local-like experience. And they go through the list of here of all the individual benefits. So the requirements, again, from the host side, server or Hyper-V server, Windows 2008 R2 SP1. We do have to have a CPU that supports SLAT, a G graphics card. It supports DirectX 10, and I'll have a list here in just a second of all the individual cards that do work in that environment. Enough GPU memory. From the guest side, it is Windows 7. This only runs on Enterprise or Ultimate Editions with Service Pack 1. We do not support XP. We do not support Vista. We do not support the Home Edition of Windows 7. It must be either the Enterprise Edition or the Ultimate Edition of Windows 7, and we must have Service Pack 1 on those. Now, that's the virtual machine environment in our VDI world. The remote client can be Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1, Windows 7 with SP1, or devices that support RDP Client 7.1. Now, the graphics card, as I mentioned in the introduction, they're not cheap. I don't know the last time you tried to buy a high-end server-based graphics card, but when we got into it, and we installed Dell 570s, I think was the servers that we used, and 710s, I'm sorry, not 570s, 710s, and the first couple of cards we looked at were $1,000. And across 12 users, that's pretty cost prohibitive. So you want to really look at how many users you're going to support off each individual graphics card and what that graphics card is going to cost you. So here's the ones that are supported out of the box. Usually they have more than 1 gigabyte of RAM, as well as the GPU processor on it. NVIDIA and AMD both make lots of different models across the board. If you want a full list of the ones that are supported, I did put the link here from TechNet, which shows the list of supported, or the hardware compatibility list of RemoteFX cards that we do support. Again, managing these from the different perspectives from System Center Virtual Machine Manager is how we go in and set up the hardware profiles and the templates. So here I would go to the video adapter of the virtual machine. Instead of using a standard video adapter, there's a new, again, that new box that we've got, new checkbox capabilities in SP1 that I would use the RemoteFX 3D video adapter. And notice this is where I control the maximum number of monitors from each client and how much resolution, or what are the highest resolutions that I allow and support. So notice we support up to 4 monitors from each VDI session, and notice the different resolutions. If you're going to do 4 monitors, the maximum resolution you can do is 1280 by 1024. Okay? And then it shows you how much memory is going to be required to be able to do that in the particular combinations. Most people will use just a single monitor, but again, I do want to make sure it's clear that we do support multiple monitor, but look at as you go up in resolution, the memory requirements go up pretty heavily across your graphics cards. So when we create a new host properties, okay, notice it shows our video cards with the GPU total memory and then how much memory is available. We can go and change the graphics settings here. So again, here's my graphics card, the driver that's associated with it, and how much memory is available on that video card through my System Center Virtual Machine Manager settings of that virtualized environment. We have new intelligent placement checks, so it goes through this entire process before RemoteFX is going to work. Okay, it goes down the checklist to make sure we're at R2 SP1, make sure that we've installed the features for RemoteFX under the Remote Desktop Services role, make sure that the CPU is compatible, and then it goes through and checks the manufacturer and model match. If RemoteFX is enabled, then the destination must be at SP1. Okay, so think about snapshotting your virtual machines and enabling this process. If you roll it back to a particular snapshot, RemoteFX may not be there based upon if the card was in the machine at the time when you took that snapshot, or where things were. Okay, so that's a consideration when you're doing your rollout and placement of RemoteFX. You probably want to take a snapshot first, bring the machine down, plug the card in there, bring it up and configure it, and then take another snapshot. So you have a restore point before the card was in there, and then you have another restore point after the video card is in your host server. As with memory management, we also have a lot new PowerShell commands to support this RemoteFX capability. Okay, so here are some settings that are set at each virtual machine properties. You can see here virtual video adapter enabled. So that's our switch that turns it on. Again, we can do all this with PowerShell scripting. Monitor max count, monitor max resolution. That is a string of the 1024 by 768 or whatever the maximum resolution you want to set. There are some new read-only properties here. Allocated GPU, this is your GPU ID. So if you have multiple GPU cards in your server, you can go through and identify each one of those. And then there are also all the different settings at the host properties, GPU memory total, available, and then for each of the individual GPUs, if you have multiple video cards in the server, you've got the capabilities here of the name of that card, total, available, and the physical ID of the GPU. So the RemoteFX requirements, again, kind of summarizing here, we do have to have the appropriate processor, we do have to have a GPU that uses DirectX. This says 9C. I recommend, obviously, DirectX 10 or later. And then if you're having multiple streaming capabilities, you do have to have the appropriate support for that. So it's the SIMD extensions 2, or SSE is the short. SSE2 is the short for that. We do have a complete planning guide if you're looking to do this, and this does have a capacity planning. So if you're saying, I want 12 or I want 200 connections at this resolution and this many monitors, it'll tell you how many graphics cards you need and how much memory you should have on each of those graphics cards that you put in the server. Okay, so if you go to the Microsoft download site and search for this family ID, you'll find this tool that is our sizer for RemoteFX. Again, it goes through and helps you do capacity planning for RemoteFX capabilities on Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1. And I'll leave that up there for a second for those of you that are writing. Again, these slides will be available through the MMS site, and I also will put them up on my blog this afternoon or tomorrow morning at the latest. So what's good hardware, what's not good hardware? So from our good hardware that we know works, from NVIDIA, notice they've got a whole line of Quadroplex cards. They also have an ATI series. The servers that work well from IBM, Dell, and HP. One of the gotchas here is do not use the Crossfire cards and the NVIDIA SLI in the same server. Okay, there are some known issues there. If you search in some of the knowledge bases, we do have some very specific workarounds for those. But again, those are the most common cards that we do know that are on our compatibility list, and customers have had very good success in running. So here's that slide one more time, blown up a little bit larger for you. Again, based upon the number of monitors that you've got and the resolution, the memory requirements on the video card. So again, if you're only running at 1024 by 768 and one monitor per each virtualized environment, 75 meg. So again, on one that has a gigabyte of memory on the graphics card, you can put a lot of those. But if you go up, to 4 monitors or up to a higher, 19.2 by 1200, you're going to, looking at 220 meg per machine. So you might only be able to run 4 or 5 off of that gigabyte. All right, so it's demo time, so let me switch over to this machine. All right, so this one's a W520 running Windows 7, and those are a lot of downloads sites. If you're interested in getting System Center, besides the bits that you got here, I've got some special AKAs here. That second one, if you download from that site and then take one of our MVA courses, about 30 minutes, we'll actually send you a $20 coupon to spend at the Microsoft online store. So that's aka.ms/$20. So from this machine, I've got a remote desktop connection. Okay, so I've done an RDP to my itprosrocks.com site. This is my Windows 7 VDI client, okay, and we have RemoteFX that we have set up and configured. What I just wanted to do a quick demonstration is show you some of the things here. Say, for example, if I play a video, okay, again, notice the nice smooth video. Let me go full screen here. Okay, so I am running an RDP session with the graphics. Okay, so the graphics rendering that's causing this particular video, if I didn't have any real good examples of 3D applications or a CAD CAM application, but I'm using the memory and the GPU that's on the server, that's on our host. Okay, this particular host happens to be down in San Francisco, or in the Silicon Valley south of San Francisco, where we're doing the hosting. So I can RDP into this site from anywhere and get this great Windows 7 smooth arrow glass capabilities, nice video smooth streaming here, not having to worry about rendering all that locally on this individual machine, that all that rendering is done remotely for me, and then the actual interface with the RDP client, allowing me to be able to have great graphics capability and a much better user experience using RemoteFX. Excuse me. All right, I quickly want to go over in the last few minutes that I've got here just some of the planning sessions. I didn't put all of the slides that I had. If you're interested, I've got some resources that I can point you to, some additional locations for additional information about planning of your VDI deployment with RemoteFX. But I wanted to put just a few of the slides in here and then make sure we still leave a few minutes for some questions. So again here, the core VDI, talking about RDP with your VDI architecture of how you want to set up the configuration. We've got these RD clients on the left-hand side here coming into our connection, and we have a connection broker that goes out there and allows us to be able to use System Center and AppV to control all the different sessions that allows us to be able to do that. Don't forget, you've got to have both Active Directory and your license server to manage all these licenses across those environments. You can set up these different layers. There's lots of different advantages. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but you can go through and set up larger number of applications across a farm like this. And then some of the reasons why you might want to use the sessions. There's some upside for both your VDI, better operating system isolation, better native application compatibility. User admins have their own images that they work from. And then there's upside for the session virtualizations. Again, they go through some of the details here. RDP allows both session virtualization and VDI. Okay, so you decide how you want to configure this. You've got desktop centralization choices or decentralization. It really is how you want to be able to put things up and put this VDI deployment together. Okay. There's some guest considerations that you might want to think about, whether you're using a pooled virtual desktop or whether you're using individual personal virtual desktops. And that's a choice that you need to make, and that's a design choice from your architectural perspective, because you're going to go one route or the other and go through that. Again, this is just a hint of this information. I've got additional resources if you have more and want to know more about this information. This makes a guest VM considerations. Again, the pros and cons. The cons to it, your images are one-to-one. The pros allows you for local admin access. You don't have to layer everything. Some common mistakes in this scenario is you failure to virtualize the app layer. So you need to make sure you've got everything, not just the operating system. The case for pooled, again, pros and cons, enables a throwaway image, right? A lot of us today do that from the desktop perspective. If I've got a workstation that's not working, I just blast out a new image. This is doing that same type of scenario with the VDI considerations and allowing you to be able to do that. Again, you are forced to layer everything in this situation and in some of the common situations or mistakes that people make throughout this session. What can make it hard with a single master image? Again, keeping track of where each individual user state is. So you need to go through, and I know Citrix is up next with some of their Zen desktop stuff, and whether you can use a pooled model, it allows you to be able to provision these servers much easier. All right, so it's now question time. Please make sure that you fill out your evaluations of all the sessions throughout the week, and we'll open it up for a few minutes. I'll be here for questions and availability, but if those of you don't want to stick around, thank you all very much for coming today. So got a question here?
How does a solution like this compare with some of the VDI blade solutions on the market, something like ClearCube or something like that, where your VDI is all based on a virtual blade as opposed to
Right.
something like this? Like, what are the gives and takes, or just briefly?
Yeah, great question. Her question has to do with there are some blade companies out there that have a whole VDI solution versus something like this. It really depends upon what you're trying to do, and what I would recommend is setting up a lab environment. You know, yes, $1,000 is a lot for a video card, but go and look at the results. Blades are specifically used for an individual purpose machine in a particular role. This capability of adding lots of different manufacturers, as you saw, there's at least a dozen different cards that are on the hardware compatibility list, allows you flexibility. And so I would look at what is your application you're going to be running in your VDI environment, and compare how does a blade solution approach to that versus trying to do something and build your own specific configuration. Over here.
Yeah, question. What sort of tools would you recommend us using to monitor GPU activity?
That's great. What tools would I use to monitor that? Outside the System Center, I'm not familiar with. I know there's some third parties out there, but I'm not familiar enough with any of those individually to recommend a third-party brand. My business cards are up here on the table or at the bottom of the stage. Again, you can follow me on Twitter as known as TechNet. My blog is at blogs.technet.com/jweston. Over here.
Yeah, so I noticed there are a few Windows Server 8 sessions at this conference.
Yep.
I don't know specifically about this topic, right, but is there anything you can tell us today regarding what changes with RemoteFX and VDI in Windows Server 8?
His question has to do with Windows Server 8 and what might be the changes in RemoteFX. They have asked us not to discuss Windows Server 8 from the team that I'm on, so I'm really not at liberty to say. I don't know first, but if I did know, I couldn't tell you. Over here.
What does RemoteFX do to the bandwidth requirements for an RDP session?
Great question. What do they do to the remote requirements? Now again, you are using RDP session to do that. Okay, so this is all inside the same payload, but you saw that one slide that I had that had what is the payload package. The rendering is occurring at the server side, so you're still sending the keyboard and screen refreshes. Now if you have a 3D graphics application that has extremely intensive, it all depends upon the resolution that you're using. If you're going 19.2 by 1200 and a very high-end 3, you're going to send your bandwidth requirements through the roof, particularly multiple monitors.
There's no similar chart like GPU?
In that download, I don't have a chart for that, but if you look at that sizing guide, that download that allows you to go through that, you'll see some of the impact there.
Okay.
All right, I'll hang around for a few minutes for additional questions. Again, thank you all very much. Enjoy MMS.